And then you have a person like, say, Ramakrishna. He was almost born into it. And this is what will happen in the future. Gopi Krishna said, in the future, the entire race will be born into a state of enlightenment.
The next step in human evolution is a new type of perception based on Kundalini Yoga. My guest, Michael Bradford, was for many decades the right-hand man and secretary of the most notable authority on Kundalini Yoga, Gopi Krishna. Michael, it's a great honor and pleasure to have you here.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you. In the West, we know so little about Kundalini. The subject is sensationalized. I began to understand it through your work. To begin the conversation, how would you describe what Kundalini is? Is that a good place to start?
I suppose it's, as you can see from the article I sent you, the definition at the end is like 2 paragraphs long. This is one reason why I wrote the article, is because in order to really completely understand what it is, there's several different aspects to Kundalini, and you have to understand each one of those, and each one of those has a number of parts to it. So in a general sense, to be very simple, Kundalini is a physiological mechanism in the human body, which has 2 functions mainly. Those functions are, one, the construction of the fetus in the womb of the mother during the gestation process. That's Kundalini, just as much as it is in a Kundalini process when, you have energy going up your spine. So it literally builds the fetus in the womb. And I could spend 2 hours just talking about how science looks at that and why, it's really an untenable explanation the way science says it happens. But it's really Kundalini that's building the fetus in the womb. Then when you're born, Kundalini goes into what you might call a dormant phase, but later in life, depending on a number of factors, such as your heredity, spiritual practices, your health, occupation, and mental outlook is extremely important. It may become active again. And what it tries to do then is it tries to accelerate the process of evolution. And this is evolution the way, basically, we've evolved from simple life forms to more complex with more advanced faculties of perception. So what it's trying to do is to essentially activate a new faculty of perception in the brain, which is essentially dormant right now for the vast majority of people. And this new faculty of perception, when it is fully functioning, gives us the ability to perceive reality in a totally different way than we do with our intellect and our 5 senses. So it's the ability to directly perceive reality in its ultimate form as consciousness. Now, again, I could spend 2 hours just talking about that. But that's the real, what Kundalini is trying to do is actually much easier to understand than what it's trying to accomplish, than what it is actually doing in the body. What it's trying to accomplish is a new step in our evolution. So evolution went from instinctive animal consciousness, which we see in dogs, cats, horses, whatever, from instinctive animal consciousness to human, what I call normal human consciousness. And in normal human consciousness, what has happened is we have evolved this highly efficient intellect, which gives us the ability to understand the physical creation, and all these things in our intellect, which we can perceive that animals don't, like the laws of nature, the scale of the universe, the periodic table of elements, the quantum realm, mathematics. These are all things that have been brought into our ability to perceive, if you were, by the evolution of our intellect. Well, what Kundalini is trying to do is to go another step further. But rather than modifying our intellect or adding to our intellect so that we can understand more about the physical creation, what it is doing it will give us the ability to directly perceive reality in its ultimate form as consciousness. And this is really, where the study of Kundalini by science has a real problem, because science does not regard consciousness in anything like that. As far as science is concerned, consciousness is simply a byproduct of electrochemical activity in the neurons of the brain. That's all it is. When we die, we're extinguished, we're gone, finished. But when Kundalini becomes active, we have this new faculty of perception, totally new, totally different, and we can perceive reality. And if you like, I could talk a little bit about the states of consciousness that I did in the article. That might help.
Yeah, I just building on what you said, it struck me how Gopi Krishna was also very scientific in his outlook and has brought Kundalini knowledge to the world in a scientific way to the degree that he was able to, and seems as though our modern science hasn't caught up with him yet.
Oh, way behind.
And we're getting glimpses in quantum physics that this ancient knowledge of the universe may actually be true. So go ahead, tell us about the states of layers of consciousness.
Okay. First of all, I would say that what Gopi Krishna did was he took two of the basic tenets of the Indian tradition. He didn't take the whole thing because it's vast and it's really not scientific in the way it's set up. So he said, okay, let's start with science, but add in the things to science that it needs to understand Kundalini. And those two things are basically that consciousness is a higher order of reality than the physical creation we perceive with our senses. That's the first thing, that consciousness is a higher order of reality. And as you were saying, the quantum physicists, there was a fellow named Tom Campbell. I saw him doing an interview a while ago, and he said, he's a physicist himself. And he said, most of the new physicists are of the opinion that consciousness has a reality all of its own, rather than just being a byproduct of the activity in the brain. So that's the first tenet. The second tenet is there is this life energy, which is called Prana in India. It has many names in different cultures, Chi and Ki and orgone energy by Wilhelm Reich. It's got all these different names in different traditions, but essentially it's a super intelligent life energy that is intimately involved in all life processes. And it has the ability, when this pranic energy is enhanced, that's going to the brain, it has the ability to, in a way, the analogy I used in the article, it was like taking a 20 watt light bulb out of a socket and putting in a 200 watt light bulb. You get a vastly increased supply of light coming out of the bulb. So it's like it's upgrading our brain to this new level. And so those two tenets, he said, must be incorporated into science: the primacy of consciousness and the existence of this prana, this extremely subtle life energy, which science, unfortunately, has not been able to detect or image so far. And those of us involved in Kundalini research are really hoping that some new medical imaging technology will come out soon that will show this. And psychics describe the aura around the human body. This is the pranic, what Gopi Krishna called the pranic spectrum around the human body. And he said without knowing about this pranic spectrum, it's impossible to understand life. So those are the two tenets that he brought in, and said science must at least consider the possibility that these two things are true before it can really understand Kundalini. And the analogy I used in my article, which I was talking about how back, I'm sort of giving away my age here, but back when I was a kid, we got our first television set. It was just black and white. And the whole system was black and white. The cameras in the recording studios, the signals coming from the TV station, all the TV sets were all black and white. And then after a couple of years, they upgraded the system. They put color television cameras in the studios. They added the color information into the radio signals, but that did not mean that instantly all of the sets out in the viewing area could display in color. What had to happen was the sets had to be upgraded to be able to decode the color information in the radio signal, and the screen on the television had to have color pixels added. So what Kundalini is trying to do is very similar to this process. There is a vast amount of information in creation which we just cannot perceive with our senses or with any of our recording instruments. And so what Kundalini is trying to do is to upgrade our perceptive faculties so that we can perceive this additional aspect of creation. In the same way, as I said a few minutes ago, that the intellect has given us the ability to apprehend mathematics and the laws of nature, all these other things that are totally hidden from animals in a state of, animal consciousness. So that's what it's trying to do. And in the article, in order to try and explain what I mean by higher order of reality, I was talking about the 4 states of consciousness as they're given in the Indian tradition. The 4 states are the dreamless sleep is the first one, in which we have no perception of anything, or if we do, then we don't remember it when we wake up. The second state of consciousness is the dreaming state, which we're all very familiar with. And in that dream, our individual self, if you will, gets plunked into this new reality that's totally different, or can be radically different from the one we experience when we're waking. And it's so real. I gave this little description of what happened to me a couple of years ago. I had this dream one time where I was flying, and I love flying dreams. I mean, I go swooping and all that. And then after I woke up, I thought, if I ever find myself in a position where I can fly or float, then I'll know that I'm in a dream. I'll be able to tell when I'm dreaming. So a couple of months later, I had a dream, and I was in a corridor in the old high school I used to go to, which is since gone. And I found myself floating along. And suddenly it occurred to me, hey, I'm floating, so I must be dreaming. I looked around and, no, I'm not dreaming. This is real. Even when I knew I had to be dreaming, my mind could not accept that I was dreaming. It's so real when you're in a dream. Yet, the second you wake up, you know it's a construct of my mind. It doesn't have any reality beyond being a construct of my mind. So that's the third state, is the waking state. So we have dreamless sleep, dreaming sleep, the second state. The waking state is the third state. And the fourth state is enlightened consciousness, or enlightenment, or, full liberation, or all these different terms that are used for it. So in order to understand what it's like going from the waking state to the enlightened state, we can look at what happens when we go from the dreaming state to the waking state. So when we go from the waking to the enlightened state, all of a sudden, we perceive a higher order of reality. In that when we wake up, we realize the dream state was a lower order of reality than the waking state. Then when we go into enlightenment, we realize that the waking state is a lower order of reality than the enlightened state. So this is why someone who has a true, what is called a mystical experience, which is a temporary experience of this enlightened state, a person who has the true mystical experience, even if it is only for a few seconds, they will have no fear of death, none whatsoever, because it would be like someone in the waking state being told, if you get killed when you're in a dream, you'll really be dead. You'll die. We'll have to put you in the ground. So if somebody says to a person who has had a mystical experience or lives in the permanent state, like Gopi Krishna did, that when you die, your body, you'll be gone, you'll be extinguished, so we'll go, no. Because I had direct perception of this higher order of reality. I know that everything we experience in the waking state is a construct of our consciousness. And so that is how you can understand it in a way. And the when we go from a dream to the waking state, all of a sudden it's like it's much more real. It's like we suddenly realize that the dream state was not real. There's that jump from less real to more real. And let's put that on a scale of 1 to 100. That may be like going from 1 to 2. Going from the waking state to the enlightened state is like going from 2 to 100. It is that much more vast. And mystics will say it's more solid than solid. It's more real than real. And so that sense of going to a higher order of reality, so difficult to convey in the waking state, but that's really what it is. So that kind of gives us a bit of a perspective on what it's like to go into the enlightened state. And one of the other perceptions, when you're in the enlightened state, you actually perceive your individual consciousness, that core of your being, is like a spark from this universal consciousness, which is the higher reality. And Gopi Krishna had a couple of really wonderful analogies. He said, if you take a drop of water from, say, the Pacific Ocean, it will have exactly the same chemical constitution as the Pacific Ocean, exactly the same. But it's not the ocean, it's just a drop. And that's like the relationship between our individual consciousness and what I call the transcendent consciousness, the ultimate reality. We are, in our essence, exactly the same, but we're finite, we're not infinite. Transcendent consciousness is infinite, we are finite. And the second analogy that he used, which is a really beautiful one, he said, if you think of having, say you have a room sitting out in a field somewhere, and there's no windows or doors, there's only one window, there's no doors or other windows, just one little window, and you're in the room and it's dark. You can't see anything. There's nothing in the room. You can't see any objects or anything like that. And all of a sudden, a beam of sunlight comes shining in through the window. All of a sudden, there are the objects. They have size, shape, color, perspective. They have, in a sense, become real because of that beam of light coming in through the window. But the beam of light is not of the nature of the room or the objects. The beam of light is of the nature of the sun, millions of kilometers away. So that spark of consciousness in us is not of the nature of the physical creation or the body or anything. It's of the nature of consciousness. And this is another way that I use to try and explain, people will, they want to know how would you describe what reality is? Because science looks at reality, it's like the physical universe. That's all there is to it. It's just the physical universe. But in terms of consciousness, it's very different. And going back to the analogy of the waking state and the dream state, when we have a dream, we create a reality within our mind. And then I'm going to use the term, populate that reality with our individual self. At the transcendent scale, the transcendent consciousness creates the entire physical universe. And I talked about how it does this in the article. And the whole Indian tradition is all about how that creation process happens. But it populates that physical universe with points of its own self, its own consciousness. So that's another way to understand what enlightenment is and what this transcendent consciousness is through using analogies like that.
Can we say that the universal consciousness desires our awakening as a kind of going back to source?
I think Arthur Avalon, who was a pen name for Sir John Woodruff, and he wrote a book called The Serpent Power, which, in my humble opinion, is the best book that's ever been written about Kundalini in the Indian tradition by a Westerner. And he said, the way he described it, he said, in order to have finite experience, the transcendent consciousness has what we would call a dream. It's like a dream. It's a creation of its own, which it populates. So it desires to have finite experience. So it creates this physical creation in order to have that finite experience. I don't know why. It's, who knows why, but it has that ability to create this subordinate reality, which we call the physical universe. And in that subordinate reality, we have things that are finite, like our bodies and everything else in the universe. So he described, and in fact, it took me about, I guess about 30 or 40 years before I really understood what Maya is. Like people say, Maya, the veil of illusion. I can, well, what is it that's real and what is it that's being veiled and how is it being veiled? And in the Serpent Power, Avalon or Woodruff says that Maya Shakti is that aspect of this creative power that creates this physical universe. It's that aspect which takes a spark of that infinite consciousness, it contracts it to a point in time and space, and it creates a sense of separation from the real transcendent consciousness. And I guess the way I would think of it is that these individual points of consciousness have as their goal getting back to the original state, to understanding the original state or being part of the original state, which, is enlightenment. We have to understand what's real and what's not real. And in India, there are certain schools of thought that say that, well, if you can discern what is real from what is not real, you will become enlightened. It's one way to look at how to become enlightened. But that's, in terms of why the creation has this universe that we have finite experience in, that's the only explanation I can come up with. It desires somehow or wants to have this finite experience.
What I've come to is that these points of light, beings, us, that are having finite experiences, are making decisions within our free will, to the degree that we have free will, and that the transcendent consciousness can't predict what these finite beings will do. Now, I don't know if the universal consciousness can predict what these finite beings will do, but by making our decisions in the moment, I think the universal consciousness is learning something new. Is such a thing plausible?
Well, that's the way I understand it, is that transcendent consciousness is infinite. And that means it has infinite awareness. It is aware of everything that happens to every molecule in the universe at every point in time, from the time the universe began until the time it's gone. It has infinite knowledge. It knows everything that's happening in the universe at any point in time and space. And it also has intelligence as well, which is infinite. So to me, in a way, it doesn't really make any sense. If this transcendent consciousness is infinite, why would it do that? And that to me is the biggest puzzle, why the infinite consciousness, which is everything, why it would have this finite experience, but we just know that it does. And, karma, the way I understand, the purpose of life is through karma. And I studied in the Vedic tradition for about 30 years. And karma is an integral part of the Vedic tradition. And the way I came to understand karma is that it is a tool for learning. So in the West, karma is looked at like, well, your karma is going to get you, It's like cause and effect. You throw something up in the air, it's going to come down and hit you on the head. And in India, they have a somewhat different attitude towards it. They look at karma in a way as like a system of brownie points. And they go, well, if I suffer in this life, I'll be on easy street in the next incarnation. But I don't really subscribe to either of those as a way of understanding karma. Karma is a tool for teaching. It's a tool for teaching. So let's say, and this is a personal experience I had, a good friend of mine passed away about 10 years ago. And at the funeral, I was talking to his wife, and she said, why did he leave me? Why has he done this to me? We loved each other so much. And I said, look, maybe in a past life, you died young on him and he had to spend the rest of his life without you. Now, you cannot understand that dynamic without experiencing both sides, as the person it happened to and the person that does the act that caused it. You have to experience both sides. So karma is a way of giving us the opportunity to have virtually any and every possible life experience. So this, to me, again, if the transcendent consciousness is infinite, why would it need that? I don't know. We're all finite and we cannot understand that. But that's the best way that I can come up with to understand why we exist. And then it really gives a purpose to life, because the purpose to life is not having a bigger car, bigger house, bigger bank account, the status. It's not about having physical things. It's about accelerating your evolution to have this perception of the ultimate reality. And when you have that perception, you understand that reality is complete. When I used to go to my Vedic classes, we used to chant this mantra at the end of each class. And the mantra was, this is completeness. That is completeness. From this completeness, that completeness arose. Having removed that completeness from this completeness, completeness only remains. Of course, we would chant it in Sanskrit. But that gives an idea, like it's about completeness, wholeness. And when you achieve the enlightened state, it is blissful beyond anything we can even remotely understand. I mean, we have the bliss we experience in sex, but that's like it's like comparing a firefly to the light from the sun. So we experience this complete and total completeness, as you were. That's not a very good way to say it, but we experience ultimate completeness. And being complete, it wants for nothing. It has everything. It's complete, so it's blissful. So that's to me, the real purpose of life is to achieve that state where we have the realization, the full realization of this transcendent consciousness. And Gopi Krishna was asked once, there was a big meeting, I think it was in 1875 in New Delhi, and they got, a lot of the big name gurus to attend this meeting, and scientists as well. And at one point they had all the speakers up on the stage, and they said, well, how would you describe this state? And what Gopi Krishna said, he said, there's only two ways that the state can be described to a person who has not had it. He said, one is silence, the other is tears. So to me, the purpose of life is to attain that realization of our completeness with the universal consciousness.
And getting into the very more concrete questions, for someone who wants to attain this, who wants to go on the path to attaining this, what are the ways that they would go about that?
People are different. And one way you can see how this difference relates to spiritual transformation, if you will, is look at all the different types of yoga. You have bhakti yoga, the yoga of devotion, which says the best way to achieve enlightenment is by complete and utter and total devotion to the divine. And you have jnana yoga, which is the yoga of discrimination, where you discern what is real from what is not real. Then you have hatha yoga, hatha, the sun and the moon. Hatha yoga is about the physical aspect of controlling your body, and there are various disciplines in hatha yoga to try and achieve enlightenment. To give you an idea of how extreme these disciplines can be, there was one discipline that involved taking a knife and cutting away at the base of the tongue bit by bit, so that you gain the ability to put your tongue back down your throat. So eventually you get to the point where The person trying to achieve enlightenment would put their tongue back down their throat and essentially die. And in some cases, Kundalini will awaken and go to the brain to save the brain from death. And unfortunately, probably in most cases, it didn't work. But it gives you an idea that the physical practice that, you know, that could be so extreme in Hatha Yoga. It's very much into the physical practice of complete and total control of the body. And then you have Raj Yoga, which is, you know, a combination of several of these. You have the physical practices, you have the devotion, you have the discernment. So individuals are different. Some people are oriented towards devotion, like Ramakrishna. You know, his sense of devotion was legion. And so that is what's best for a person like that, where they don't have maybe the intellectual desire or capacity to really go in and understand every little aspect of how Kundalini works. And other people, they want the physical discipline. So I guess to me, you have to look at it like what appeals to you in terms of a way to achieve enlightenment. But in general, the way to achieve enlightenment, and Gopi Krishna was always very emphatic about this. He said, you have to make yourself what this higher intelligence wants you to be. Now, what does a higher intelligence want us to be? It wants us to be enlightened. It wants to be in a state of this consciousness. And he's talked about what humanity would be like when this faculty of perception becomes universal in the race, the same way the intellect has become. He said, the earth will be transformed. There will be no poverty, no hunger, no wars, no conflicts, no substance abuse. These will all be gone because the people inhabiting in that state of consciousness will have no need of these things. You know, their egos will be subdued. They don't have to have power over others. They have no desire for power or wealth. So he said, these people will be paragons of virtue. And what you need to do is to show this higher intelligence, because it's really in control. It's the one that's going to decide whether this works or not. You have to show this higher intelligence that you are making every effort to be that kind of person. And of course, this goes right back to all the spiritual traditions. With the emphasis on truthfulness, all the virtues, truthfulness, kindness, charity, steadfastness. I mean, you know, there's like a dozen different, for every spiritual tradition has them. This is the way you must behave. And, you know, many people look at that as like, well, why should I bother? You know, it's just, why should I be self-disciplined? But if you really are serious about achieving the state of enlightenment, then it's essential that you make your life into what this higher power wants humanity to be, not just you, but the whole of humanity. So that's the best way to go about it, is to think of it in those terms. And you also have to understand the physiological aspects of it. And, you know, I mean, I talk to many people about their Kundalini experiences and the teachers they have. And when you understand it as a physiological process, which is changing the brain, it's actually the activation of a new center in the brain. This is what Kundalini is trying to do, to activate this new center, or this, it exists in our brain already, but it's dormant. It's trying to activate this dormant area of the brain. So when you understand that, you can use that as a guide to whether a spiritual practice is really valid or not. You know, is it something that is really going to contribute to, you know, you achieving your goal? And so I always encourage people, understand what you were trying to accomplish. Don't just go, oh, I'm going to practice this form of meditation or this form of yoga or whatever, without really having a clear idea of what you're trying to accomplish. And so, you know, the virtues of all the different faiths are kind of like the bedrock of the state of behavior, or the type of behavior that you need to work towards in order to achieve this. So I guess that's really my basic answer is to understand what you're trying to get to, follow the virtues of your faith. If you're comfortable with a particular faith, then go with that faith. If you're not comfortable, then, I mean, people ask me like, well, what faith are you? My answer is, I'm a member of no faiths and I'm a member of all faiths. So I look at all the different faiths out there and I go, well, I could never be a part of any faith that does not treat women as absolutely equal to men in terms of their rights and capabilities and all that. And you look at most of the faiths out there, the women are second-class citizens. Well, that's not for me. And then, you look at various other aspects of the faith and their beliefs. And you also have to understand that the major faiths came into being like 1,500 to 2,000, 2,500 years ago. And faith is something that has to change and evolve in the same way that individuals do. And, I always try to look at faiths and say, what is the best part of this faith that I can adopt? What is the attitude or whatever? So having a belief, and the Emerging Sciences Foundation, which is an organization that I work with, Michael and Linda Molina, are working to have this paper published about it's a psychological evaluation of a person with a questionnaire to determine if they have a spiritual experience. And, we're trying to work in that direction, to understand Kundalini in these different ways. But one of the things they discovered was that what's really critical in terms of having success in the endeavor is your attitude, having the attitude that, I can achieve this state, it's something that I can work towards. Having, I guess what it would come down to is having faith in a higher power, that you have to have that faith in a higher power. If you don't have faith in a higher power, your chances are much lower in terms of achieving that state. Now, it's not that it doesn't happen. I've known people who had no belief in anything, and yet they lived an exemplary life, kindness to others, service to mankind. So it's not cut and dried, but in general, having a strong attitude that there is a higher power that is really in control of what's going on. And I have to model my life after what that higher power wants. That's really essential. It's really, when we look at the survey that they did, we looked at the people who had the most success in terms of this transformation. It was people who had this really deep inner faith that there is a higher power. So, but it's a very complicated subject. There's so many aspects to it. It's more than, we can really do today except to just touch on it. But I hope that gives a general idea.
Yes. And, when you say some people have this faith, are there some people also sense that they have a knowing that this is actually the way the universe, the way the reality is, that it's not just based on faith, but it's a sense of knowing that there is a transcendent consciousness, and that they can, I like to make the distinction between faith and knowing, because some people, I think, have an inherent knowing about it.
Well, it's like what I said of the states of consciousness, that when you have the enlightened experience, like through what's called a mystical experience, you have the state of knowing that spark of individual that's you is infinite. It's an aspect of the transcendent. And that no matter what happens, that can never be killed. So that is different. Like for me personally, I believe that to be the case. I believe it, but I don't know it. I've never had the experience. I don't know that it is, but I believe it. I'm kind of hoping it is. But this is the difference. It's because you have that experience of a higher order of reality, this new faculty of perception in the brain when it becomes active. And that's how you have this, this absolute, complete, and utter total conviction of what you've experienced.
I know there are people who try very, very hard for decades to have the experience of the awakening. And for Gopi Krishna, it wasn't like that. I understand that he was meditating and he suddenly had this amazing, unbelievable, awe-inspiring experience, and he didn't know what it was. And he found out later by talking with people that it was the Kundalini experience. It seems like it can happen to people who are least expecting it, and others are trying to have it and don't get it.
Yeah, well, first of all, consider that Gopi Krishna started meditating when he was 17 years old, and he built up the practice till he was meditating for 3 hours every day in the morning, every day. In his autobiography, he talks about how the morning after his wedding night, he gets up to meditate for 3 hours, and his wife is going, "What are you doing?" But that's the way he was, utterly disciplined. So he meditated for 3 hours a day for 17 years. He had the Enlightenment experience when he was 34. So it wasn't like it just happened out of the blue. And what he did was he did a type of meditation where he was sitting in like a yoga posture, and he was envisioning, you could see my little symbol over my head here. He was envisioning, and this isn't a lotus, but that's what he envisioned, a lotus flower in full bloom above his head. And he would focus on this image of this lotus flower with absolute fixity of attention, complete and total, utter fixity of attention, which requires a tremendous amount of effort, tremendous amount of effort. He did this for 17 years before the experience happened. And yet I know of people, there's one fellow I knew, he went to one TM lecture that had a full-blown Kundalini experience. And it took him about 7 years to really get through it to the point where he could live like a normal, stable life again. One TM, that's all, just bang. And so one of the things that has to be taken into consideration is the person's heredity and their bodily constitution, which is a result of that heredity. And because this is an evolutionary transformation, there are certain people who are right on the edge of having the experience. And one of Gopi Krishna's greatest desires was to have an experimental project where we would take a group of, say, 50 to 100 candidates, and we would screen them very carefully to find those candidates who were right on the verge of having the experience. And there's various ways, that you could tell, by their nature, by their family history, these other things. A person like that does not take much to get them into a full-blown Kundalini experience, whether it will result in enlightenment. In Gopi Krishna's case, from the initial experience to when he really transitioned into the permanent state, 12 years of constant change in his body. But just to have a group of people where we would select them based upon their ripeness, I guess you could say. They're ripe for the experience. So, and then you have a person like, say, Ramakrishna. He was almost born into it. And this is what will happen in the future. Gopi Krishna said, in the future, the entire race will be born into a state of enlightenment in the same way that we're all born with an intellect. Although, to tell you the truth, when I look around these days, I sometimes wonder. But he said the whole race will be born enlightened. Now, this may take 1,000 years, 5,000, 100, I don't know. But what he also said was this process of acceleration, this evolution, can be accelerated by modifying the lifestyle and doing the disciplines. So it's kind of like where this process has been going up slowly but steadily, but it could just go zoom if the human race applied itself to this endeavor. He said it's going to be the biggest endeavor the human race has ever undertaken. And it's really unfortunate that in our world today, the only goal that's put forward in life is materialistic, except for the spiritual traditions. But generally, we are encouraged to consume. We're encouraged to get the bigger car, the bigger house, the bigger job, the whole bit. That's the be all and end all of life, is to have those things consume, consume, consume. The more you have, the better. And in addition to being horribly destructive to the planet, it frustrates this evolutionary impulse. And so we are really doing, unfortunately, almost the exact opposite of what we need to do to achieve this state. And, but what Gopi Krishna said is that nature, or this higher power, will eventually prevail, despite our best efforts to mess it up. That, these anti-evolutionary modes of life, I guess you could call them, will eventually be let go of. And he said, this will apply to every aspect of our life, to our education, to our political systems, to our religious systems, to our everything. Like all aspects of our life will have to be looked at in terms of how are they contributing to this evolution. So, I try and keep a positive attitude despite all the things that I see when I turn on the news, that, there is a higher power and control. And even though we're messing up pretty badly right now, we will eventually succeed in getting through this.
Well, it's sometimes something good comes out of something not so good. And, the British went into India, and then we have, after many years, a Gopi Krishna who speaks English beautifully and is disseminating this view of the world and disseminating knowledge of Kundalini. So now, despite everything that's going on, we do have people who are having these kinds of conversations.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of points of light that didn't exist before. People that became much more conscious, even though at the same time the other is going on. So I think I think there's reason to be optimistic about it. I want to just throw that out there, and I think you probably are too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That it's happening. I wanted to ask you, what did Gopi Krishna say about Kundalini and healing of the body? And I don't know about the mind, but I know he had healing experiences, that Prana was working on his organs. I read that.
Yeah.
Is that the extent of what we could know about that? That Prana works that way?
Prana is a whole world unto itself. And after I finished writing this article that I sent to you, I thought, well, I got to do another one on prana now, because it's a whole area of understanding and experimentation we're going to have to do to understand it. But prana, there are three aspects to prana, the way I understand it. This is my own personal view. It's an information storage system. It's a communications medium, which explains psychic phenomena. And it's an energy storage and transmission system in the body. And the pranic spectrum is what Gopi Krishna called it. He said there's this pranic spectrum that is the essence of who we are as a person. And in the article I wrote, I explained it kind of like the analogy of a movie projector throwing an image on a screen. So in a movie projector, you got the light bulb, which is unchanging. It's just this white light. It's always there, always shining. That's like our individual consciousness. Then we have our mind, like this light shines through our mind. And this is the process of creation, as the Indian tradition understands it. This consciousness shines through the mind, and the mind is like the moving film in the movie projector. You've got the celluloid film going through with all these different images. So that aspect of our mind, that is created by a pranic spectrum. Then the beams of light that come through the celluloid film get thrown onto a white screen. That's like our physical senses. It's like it brings into physical manifestation what's being projected from the consciousness. And the images on the screen are like physical matter. And so the pranic spectrum is this almost like I don't know, entity is not the right word, but it's a spectrum of energy and consciousness or whatever that is responsible for every aspect of our being, for our health, our well-being, It runs every aspect of our body. In the article and in Consciousness, the New Paradigm, the book that I wrote about 10 years ago, I gave all sorts of examples of how life cannot be explained without some kind of super intelligent consciousness and energy working to make it run every minute of every day. And so this prana is integral to that whole process of operating the body. It literally, I was just flabbergasted when I started studying microbiology and seeing all these things that science couldn't explain. They can see what's going on, but they can't explain them. And in the article, I talked about protein folding, because that's one of the real interesting things that science really doesn't understand. But how a protein is created is like this chain of amino acids comes out of a ribosome, and it folds up into a shape. And this process of folding could happen in millions, billions, or trillions of different ways, but it always happens exactly the right way. And science has no understanding of why it does that. They have this contest where they're trying to predict the way a protein should fold. Like they're told this is what the protein is trying to do. And the most advanced AIs in the world, they can get it correct maybe 35, 40% of the time. So it's an unimaginably complex process, but science has no idea how it happens. None. And it gives you an idea of how incredibly complex this is, how many possibilities there are for this thing to fold. Science has no idea. It's a total mystery. And when I started looking at microbiology, the way cells divide, I was absolutely floored. And one time, in order to learn microbiology, I started watching some lectures, and I won't say where they were from. They were from a university in the United States. And the professor was talking about, I can't remember what the particular thing was that he was discussing, but it was something amazing that happened inside these cells. And he concluded by saying, it's just like magic. If magic is the only way that science can explain what's going on, then science does not understand it. So prana is an element of how this transcendent consciousness controls life. And it can basically, it essentially runs the body from end to end. All the major systems in the body, like our digestive system, our circulation system, elimination system, from those major systems right down to what goes on inside every individual cell. It's staggering, the complexity, how these things work. And the only way, in my mind, that they can be explained is that they are being controlled by this super intelligence working through this life energy. And in Consciousness, the New Paradigm, I gave many, many examples of how something would happen in a cell, or when a cell was dividing. Like, for instance, when a cell divides, you have 23 pairs of chromosomes. They get replicated into 46 pairs of chromosomes. And then the cell splits down the middle, and you have two cells that have like an exact complement. What is it that makes sure that every chromosome gets replicated once and only once? And what is it that makes sure that the perfect complement goes to each side, and that you don't have like two number 7 chromosomes on this side and two number 8s on that? There was no explanation. None. And this is just like one of, over and over, I would see these things and go, well, yeah, that's how it's working. They can see what's going on, but what's controlling it? Keep in mind, these things are dynamic. It's not like something that you set in motion and it's like decisions have to be made every second about all these things. And so the only really rational explanation to me is that there is some sort of agency at work in the physical body. And the physical body consists of an adult, somewhere between, I think, 10 to 50 trillion cells. Trillion. That means that the human body is millions of times more complex in terms of cells than the most complicated thing that humanity has ever constructed. It's millions of times more complex than that. And each individual cell is like a little world unto itself. And I try to convey how miraculous the human body is. And I thought of this analogy. I thought, what if you decided that you wanted to make a construct like the human body? And you go to an engineer, and you'd say, look, Mr. or Ms. Engineer, I want to make this construct. And they go, oh, okay. So I said, well, it's going to have about 20 to 50 trillion parts to it of several hundred different types. And they go, ooh, that's going to cost you. And what else? This construct has to be self-maintaining all by itself. It has to be able to acquire the inputs it needs to survive, like the energy in whatever form. Oh, okay. What else? This construct has to be self-repairing, at least in the case of non-catastrophic damage. Whew. And then thirdly, this construct must be self-replicating, at least with the help of one other person. And the only response you get from the engineer is, why don't you go down the hall and talk to Fred? He might be able to help you. It is so miraculous, this construct that's our physical body, self-maintaining, self-repairing. And if you want to, as an example of how prana can reconstruct the body, and this is something that really amazed me, someone very well known to me had a bit of an accident with a knife one time and was cutting something and just cut the little end off her finger. Didn't hit the bone or anything, but just sort of slice a little chunk off the top of her finger. When it healed, her fingerprint was there. I thought, just a minute, like, where is this fingerprint coming from? Like, how did that get put when it was healing? How did it heal with the fingerprint? So there's all these things, and everywhere you look in nature, there's just absolutely amazing transformation processes going on. Like you have, say, like a tadpole, which has no lungs, and it breathes through its skin and all this. It has a tail, then it goes through a transformation. It has no tail, and it breathes air. Or a butterfly, like a caterpillar transforming into a butterfly. How does that work? It's so unimaginably complex that to explain it in the sense of, well, it's just mechanical. It's irrational. So it's this prana shakti. It's that aspect. You have Kundalini Shakti and you have Prana Shakti. Kundalini Shakti, as I said earlier, is responsible for the creation of the body during gestation, and it's responsible for the Kundalini process later in life. So that's what Kundalini Shakti does. Prana Shakti is in charge of running the body for the time you're born to the time you die. That's what Prana Shakti does. And it's this infinitely intelligent consciousness that works through this extremely subtle vital energy called the individual prana. And the individual prana is essential, according to Gopi Krishna. This individual prana is essential not just for how the body works, but for our thinking. He said it is a fuel for thought. And so the goal of the Kundalini process is to open up the center in the brain, to bring it into activity, and to modify the nervous system of the body to be able to provide an enhanced quantity and quality of pranic energy to the brain. And like I said earlier, you take a 20-watt light bulb out of a socket and put in a 200-watt. You need more power to make the 200-watt bulb work properly. And so Kundalini is trying to open the center in the brain, and then it starts the energy coming up from the base of the spine. And, for years and years and years, people would talk about, well, Kundalini becomes active at the base of the spine and it sends this energy up the spine. I know, what energy? Where does this energy come from that Kundalini is talking about? Does it manifest it out of nothingness? I mean, what is it? But Gopi Krishna explained that prana is an element of air, the air that we breathe. And air has three components. It has nitrogen, which is essentially inert. Nitrogen atoms bond with each other with an incredible strength. They don't like to be separated. So it's basically inert. Then you have carbon dioxide, which is a waste product of the body. So that wouldn't be that. The only thing left is oxygen. So he said this prana is in some way attached to the oxygen atom. And how or what, we don't know. It's for research to discover. When we breathe air into our body, our circulatory system transports the oxygen to virtually every one of the trillions of cells in the body. And each cell absorbs the oxygen through the cell wall. And Gopi Krishna said that each cell of the body is like a battery. It's like a AA battery storing an electric charge, except it's storing a pranic charge, which it extracts from the oxygen molecule. Then what happens is the nerves extract this pranic essence from the cells of the body. And he said some cells are better at it than others. I think he felt that muscle cells could hold more energy than other types of cells. But it extracts this energy from the cells of the body. Now, part of this pranic essence goes to the brain. So for a person in a state of normal consciousness, they have only a limited amount of this pranic energy coming to the brain to fuel the way the brain works. The bulk of this pranic essence goes to the reproductive organs, and it's stored in the fluids of the reproductive organs of both women and men. Women and men have different physiologies, but he called it a parallel process. So it stores this pranic essence in the fluids of the reproductive system. Now, there's two purposes that these fluids or this concentrated essence can be used for. One is sexual activity and reproduction. And he said it's this pranic essence that provides the energy of the sperm and the ovum, and it also provides the sensations of pleasure we experience in sex. So that is one usage of that energy in the reproductive organs. But he said when the center of the brain opens up, ideally what happens is the center at the base of the spine also starts to function. And how these two are related, we're really not sure. In many cases, I've seen situations where a person has a mental stimulation of some kind. Maybe it's a near-death experience, very common. And the center at the base of the spine will suddenly start working, sending up energy. In any case, the center at the base of the spine takes this essence from the reproductive organs and it transforms it or transmutes it into a very refined substance, which in the Indian tradition is called ojas, O-J-A-S, ojas. And it sends this ojas up the spine to the brain so that it can power this new center of consciousness that's just waking up in the brain. Now, what happens with most people is in a mystical experience, they'll have the experience for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe an hour or two, but eventually the source of that energy is used up and they come back to a state of normal consciousness. But what Kundalini is trying to do in the long run is to modify the nervous system of the body so that a much larger network of nerves is taking this pranic essence directly to the brain so that the drain on the reproductive organs, it decreases. So this is the reason why most spiritual traditions, they recommend celibacy for the period of time when you're going through the spiritual transformation. Because I know people who have been in that situation where they have very active Kundalini, they have changes going on, they become psychic, they become more creative. But if they engage even once in sex, then it's this terrible depression will settle on them. They'll feel awful. And so the brain needs, during this transformation process, all the energy that the reproductive system can provide. And then eventually, and in Gopi Krishna's case, it took 12 years for this to really happen completely. 12 years for his body to adjust so that it could provide this energy to the brain directly. And That's the goal of the Kundalini process. The activation of the center in the brain, the activation of the center at the base of the spine, and the eventual transformation of the nervous system so that this center in the brain can be powered directly by the nervous system. So that in a nutshell is the Kundalini process, the way he understood it. I call it Gopi Krishna's model because there's other models out there, but that's the one that to me makes the most sense. It explains a lot of things that otherwise can't be explained. Like one thing, for instance, is people who do intensive meditation and pranayama. Pranayama is breathing exercises that enhance the intake of prana into the body. When they do these things intensively, what happens is it stimulates the collection of this prana from the body into the reproductive organs. But since the center in the head, in the brain is not open, it can't use all that energy. So what do you get? A much increased libido. And so I know there's, in the spiritual world, you might call it, there are unfortunately cases where spiritual teachers kind of go off the rails and start having, relations with their female disciples. And, people go, well, why do they do that? They're supposed to be spiritual. But when you understand that the reproductive system is intimately involved in spiritual transformation, then it makes sense. And Gopi Krishna, he said, in India, if you decided you wanted to become enlightened, you go to a guru and say, Guruji, I wish to become enlightened. And they say, okay, go clean my laundry, go do my laundry, go do this, make my supper for me. And the disciple will go, I came here to become enlightened in time. And the guru would study the disciple, all the aspects of their personality. And the guru would work to iron out the kinks and especially to teach the disciple self-discipline. Because in some cases, when Kundalini becomes active, it can cause the reproductive system to go into overdrive, which can create tremendous problems. If they succumb to that desire physically, it could really create difficulties for what's going on with the Kundalini process. So, he said they would train these people to have iron self-discipline and control of their bodies. So this particular model that he's come up with, to me, answers questions like that. Why do people have some people have an enhanced libido. Other people, their sex drive dries up when they start having Kundalini activity. They have no interest in sex anymore. And usually it's for a period of time, not permanently. And it's because the brain needs that energy. And so, it's taking all of that essence to the brain. So there's a lot of things that this physiological process in the body that Gopi Krishna outlines can explain, that otherwise, if you go back to the Indian tradition, as I said in the Indian tradition, in the article about the Indian tradition, back when this knowledge came into being, and we're talking 4,500 years ago, say 2,500 BC, back then, it was realized that this knowledge could be very dangerous. Like for a person to undertake these intense spiritual disciplines, if Kundalini became active and the body wasn't pure enough, or the mental makeup of the person wasn't disciplined enough, it could create terrible problems. And so they tended to restrict the information or knowledge about Kundalini to what's called the oral tradition. It was passed down by word of mouth from teacher to disciple. It was not written down. Now, there is an oral tradition of Kundalini that still exists in India, but I think probably after 4,500 years, quite a bit of that knowledge that was originally known has been lost. And so to try and understand what Kundalini is and how it works from what's left of the written tradition, you just won't find most of that knowledge. So it's going to be up to modern science to go, what's happening in the body? How can we understand it? And of course, science is much better positioned to do this because science has tools like microbiology, genetics, biochemistry, physics, quantum theory. These are all things that are intimately involved in the way life works that they didn't have back then. So it's going to be up to science to really try and understand this physiological process in the body. But science has to always keep in mind that Kundalini is in charge, like this consciousness behind the physical creation, and that there is this subtle energy in the body, this prana, that this intelligence uses to control how the body works.
Could I ask you, what were these masters concerned about could happen if people were using these practices and they weren't the people who should be using them?
One of the ways that he explained it to me once was, he said, when Kundalini becomes active, it tends to magnify the negative aspects of the personality first and foremost. So if you have, say, uncontrolled emotions, like you have greed for power or greed for wealth, and a lot of people get into, like in ancient Egypt, they did these disciplines to gain power over other people. And so the teacher would hammer away at the personality of the disciple until that point where they thought it would be safe for them to have this. One of the things that Kundalini gives a person is charisma. Charisma. They become, they influence people. And if you look at the great spiritual teachers in the world, they had unbelievable charisma. And Gopi Krishna had it too. People just, he said, if I wanted to become a big name guru, he said, I could have had millions of followers. He said, I could have done that, but he chose not to. So that's one thing, is that controlling the mental attitude of the disciple so that the result isn't an aberration. Even someone, and people are a bit shocked about this, someone like Hitler, Kundalini was quite active because he had tremendous charisma, but his mental nature was so warped that he compromised the whole world, just this one man, by the power. So that is one thing, the psychological aspect. The other is the physical aspects. Now, one of the things that is extremely important in terms of going through a Kundalini process, and this is something that every person who wants to awaken Kundalini must understand, is that the quality of the energy going to the brain is critically important. And how are the ways that this quality of the psychic, this pranic energy could be compromised? Let's look. Alcohol, tobacco, recreational drugs, poor air quality, food that is low on nutrients and high on additives and artificial whatevers, which is like 90% of what you see in the supermarket these days. Then there is lifestyles where the person is heavily overworked and stressed. They don't get enough sleep. They don't get enough exercise. And their whole mental focus is on making money, acquiring wealth. These are all the things that can toxify the prana. And when the prana becomes toxified, I met one fellow in India. He was a very competent professional man, very successful in his career. He ended up in the mental hospital when Kundalini became active in him. And fortunately, the mental hospital he went to or was in Srinagar, Kashmir, and Gopi Krishna lived there in Srinagar. And he was out one day in the town and found a bookstore, and it was the first edition of Gopi Krishna's autobiography was in this bookstore, and he read it. He says, I got to find this guy. And he did. And Gopi Krishna eventually restored him back to full mental health. And, he was a good friend of ours for a number of years. And so if the prana is not healthy, the person can literally go insane. But most people, what happens is they have, instead of psychoses like that, they have neuroses. They become obsessive compulsive disorder. They become fearful of things, anxiety disorders. There's a whole range of these mental disorders that can happen because the prana is not pure enough. So this is what the teacher would make sure that the student was living a lifestyle where they were maximizing the quality of the prana in the body by all these different things. So if you look at our Western lifestyle, unfortunately, the vast majority of people are living a lifestyle, and self included, which is not totally conducive to a Kundalini awakening. Of course, it varies a lot from person to person, but those are the major dangers. Are the mental aberration that can lead to terrible consequences, on a global scale in extreme cases, or for the individual themselves. And there's physical disorders, the whole list of physical disorders that can happen. So, for instance, people who have aberrant Kundalini activity, they'll wake up in the middle of the night and the bed will be soaked with sweat. They'll have sensations that sometimes very painful or unpleasant sensations of all throughout the body, like insects on the skin. There's a whole host of physical problems that can happen. There could be, this is another one, they have things go wrong with them that modern medical science cannot find any reason for. It's Kundalini, and then that'll subside and another one will start up. And so there's all these different mental and physiological issues that could come up for a person who undertakes the disciplines without competent guidance. And there are even, I hate to say it, but I think that there are even people that really shouldn't be doing the disciplines if they're really extremely out of balance mentally. Like some people have a heredity, which, maybe they have a history of schizophrenia in the family or whatever. For someone like that, it may not be a good thing for them to try and go to extreme spiritual disciplines, because that could, make what they're experiencing in that way worse. And if you look back through history, it is an interesting subject, because if you look back through history, you'll see that so many of the great geniuses throughout history, like Einstein, they were quirky. They were eccentric. They had, Einstein refused to wear socks, things like that. So, and in the direct family of most great sort of spiritual prodigies and geniuses, you will see one direct family member, mother, father, brother, sister, or children, who had extreme mental issues, probably in the majority of cases. So it indicates that these mental issues have to be very carefully understood in terms of what will happen to them when Kundalini awakens, if we go through very intense disciplines. And unfortunately, I've had so many people come to me and they say, I just wish it would stop. This Kundalini has made my life hell. Fortunately, it's a very small minority that have had that happen. But there are people in whom, for whatever reason, whether it's their heredity, whether there's some aspect of their lifestyle, could be the air they breathe has some kind of toxin that's messing up the process. But they have these really aberrant Kundalini processes. So a really competent teacher will be able to look at a student, understand what is going on inside them. If they're really advanced, like Gopi Krishna was, I believe he could see the individual's prana, like a person, like a psychic can read an aura, and he could see what is going on inside them. So ideally, you should have that guidance. Unfortunately, people who achieve the same degree of success as Gopi Krishna are very few and far between. So it's really going to be up to science to understand this and to be able to prescribe things to people, both in terms of the best way for them to awaken Kundalini and what to do in case it becomes aberrant. So it's a vast area of research, but that gives you an idea. But I really want to emphasize very clearly that most people don't have anything more than mild things happen. They may become a little bit obsessive about something, but the benefits that Kundalini can bring enhance creativity. I know people, there was one woman who came out to some of our conferences, and she had started out life and became an engineer working on mega projects all over the world. And she said, in order to survive in this environment, you had to have the demeanor of a pit bull. It was just eat or be eaten. Kundalini started to become active. And up to that time, she had no interest in art, none whatsoever. Kundalini became active. And within a couple of years, she was like an accomplished artist. She went to the art college in the city where she lived. And after a year, they told her they couldn't teach her anymore. It's like, you already know this stuff. And we would put her paintings up at some of our conferences on the walls, just gorgeous, incredible artist. So other people, they have psychic abilities that develop as a result of Kundalini activity. Other people, they become creative in just about any way you can think of. Music, poetry. Poetry is almost like the hallmark of enlightenment, but that's another subject. Anyway, so there's all these benefits to Kundalini that we should not say, oh, I don't want to touch it. Get it off me. We should really go at it with an educated frame of mind and really seriously consider, are we a person who can have, say, a strong Kundalini awakening without severe consequences? So if you're suffering from severe addictive behavior of any kind, maybe you don't want to start a Kundalini process. But if you're a reasonably normal, healthy person, who lives a balanced life, you don't have any severe psychological issues, then, and you have a strong, deep spiritual yearning, and you can find someone who can really help you if things go wrong, ideally, although that's not always possible, then yeah, it's something that can enhance your life tremendously. And this woman who was an engineer, she just quit. I can't do this anymore. And she went into this totally different life of being an artist and loved it. So it can bring tremendous joy. And I'm not even talking about the bliss. Like Gopi Krishna lived in a world that it's almost impossible for us to understand. He lived in a world of light, both internally and externally. And this is a result of the 12 years of transformation he went through after the initial awakening. Internally, he said his whole inner being was lit up, like brilliantly illuminated, whereas before it wasn't. And this light went even into his dreams. He said, when I dream at night, it's like an Elysium. I'm in this land of bliss and joy and happiness and beauty is every night when I go to sleep. I'm in this land. He said, everything I look at in the external world, everything gets bathed in this ravishingly beautiful silvery golden luster. It's enchanting. And, if he would see something like a waterfall, he would just almost like merge with it. It was so powerful. And he said one time, if the human population knew what this state of consciousness that I have is like, it would be a mad rush for people doing meditation and practicing yoga. If they only knew what the state was like. It is so different. It is so beautiful, so incomparable. He said, if you have this state of mind, you want for nothing, except maybe to help mankind. He really tried to convey that a complete transformation of Kundalini, which is, I say, as rare as hen's teeth, if that happens, then the person has gained something that is incomparable. But even people who have a partial transformation, you can have this, this increase in their creativity, their sense of completeness and satisfaction, of joy in life, of a sense of, they have no fear of death anymore. And there are so many people these days, they're terrified of death, terrified. And, it's horrible to have that fear consuming you. There was a fellow named Robert Monroe, you've probably heard of him, and he was a real leader in teaching people how to do out-of-body experiences. And one thing he used to do was he'd go to people in hospitals who were in the palliative care. They're about to die. And he found that people in that in that situation, the actual, their mental body was already in the process of detaching from the physical. And he would teach them to get out of their body and do astral projection. So they could see, that's my body, that's not me. And they would lose all fear of death completely and totally. So, but having a mystical experience, like I said earlier, will do the same thing. You have no fear of death anymore. So there's all these benefits that Kundalini can bring. But, you have to go into it with a real sense of education and discernment. What's best for me? What's the goal I'm trying to achieve? How can I get help if I need it? Things like that, to really approach it in a very wise way, I guess you could say.
Michael, you mentioned pranayama and meditation to achieve the Kundalini experience. Are there any other practices that help with the Kundalini experience?
Well, here's one that most people don't want to hear: self-reform. And it is one of the most important. It is one of the most important. You have to be really honest about yourself and your life. Who am I as a human being? And what are the aspects of my personality that I need to reform in order to become the type of evolved human being that Kundalini wants the human race to be? And I described the human race earlier, the way it will be, according to Gopi Krishna, when the human race achieves this step in our evolution. No wars, no crime, no substance abuse, no interpersonal abuse, all of those things will be gone. And instead, people will be focused on the internal world, what their psychic or inner world, the realm of consciousness. He said, exploring the realm of consciousness, he said, compared to what we've learned so far about the physical universe, the realm of consciousness is infinitely more vast and more exciting and more interesting. We have to look at ourselves and go, what's holding me back from being the person? And, Gopi Krishna had, he started doing that when he was 17 years old, when he had this experience where he was in what we would call high school, and he did very well. He was very bright, but in the last year of high school, he just started reading novels out of interest, and he neglected his schoolwork. He thought, well, I'm smart, I can pass the exams. Well, he failed miserably, and his mother was devastated because his father was out of the family, and his mother had put all her hopes in him, the only surviving male child, to lift the family out of poverty. And he disappointed her terribly. So he resolved at that time, I will never let my wayward mind do this to me again. And he took steps to control his mind. He was incredibly disciplined. As an example, he contracted malaria at one point, and he used to take quinine powder, to cure it. And quinine powder apparently is incredibly bitter. Ugh, horrible stuff. Most people would just throw it in their mouth, get it down as fast as possible. He would put it into his mouth, and he would hold it under or on his tongue like this, no grimacing, absolutely, rigid self-control. And other ways, he said, at the end of every day, what he would do before going to sleep, he would review what he did during the day. And this is even, up until the day he died, I think he was doing this. He would review what he did. What did I do that I could have done better? Did I do something that negatively impacted this other person? Should I have done this? What could I have said that was better? And because he knew that Kundalini has this power to magnify negative traits. So he was always really intensely alert with regard to his own behavior. And he said, he would look at it every night. He would go through this review of what he did during the day. We have to be prepared to make changes in our life. And, it's not simple or easy. I mean, there are many people who came to him and said, oh, I want to leave my family, usually men. I want to leave my family and go off to an ashram and just sit there and meditate all day. And he said, no, you can't do that. Your family depends on you. Maybe when your children are grown up and moved away, when you're retired, yes, you can go into an ashram then, but you have your responsibilities. You can't just do what you want to satisfy even a spiritual desire like that. In some cases, like you look at Ramakrishna, he just went into an ashram. When he was quite young, and he spent the rest of his life there, and let the ashram take care of him. But most of us can't do that. So we have to balance our karmic responsibilities with our desire for spiritual transformation. But I think everyone has to do the best they can in terms of looking at their personalities. And that was another thing that he did, is self-review all the time. So, but that to me is the pranayama, meditation, and the reform of our own personality. Those are the three things that are the bedrock of spiritual transformation.
We're nearing completion, but I want to ask you just maybe two more questions, if you don't mind. What I'd like to know from you, Michael, is what is the origin? Where does prana come from? So it goes into our air, into oxygen. Where does it originate from?
It's there like the elements of the periodic table. It's, somehow it attaches to oxygen, but it has a physical component, but it is extremely subtle physical component. And as I said earlier, we don't have any imaging devices yet that can detect it. A genuine psychic will see your aura. I knew a fellow like that when I was young. He described my aura to me once, and he's a doctor now. He's very, very down to earth, very honest, sincere person, but he could see my aura. Detection of this prana is the real problem, is that it's so subtle. But as to where it comes from, it's an aspect of the physical creation we live in the same way that the atoms and molecules are an aspect of it. But beyond that, I can't say. It's something that science will hopefully be able to give us more insights into in the future. But that's the best I can.
Is it a part of the Shakti emanation, if that's the right word?
Shakti manifests everything. Everything we experience, the physical universe with every atom and every molecule is a manifestation of Shakti. And it can get really complicated, like in the Sankhya tradition, one of the 6 philosophical schools in India. There are said to be 24 levels or tattvas, things between pure consciousness and the physical creation. 24. In the Tantric tradition, there are 36, even more. It can get incredibly complicated, but basically the way it works, and if you're really interested, I would recommend that you read Consciousness, the New Paradigm, because I take like a whole chapter and explain this whole creation process of how Shakti, first of all, creates a sense of separation through Maya Shakti and the individual consciousness. Then it projects it through our mind, which has this pranic spectrum in it. Then it projects it through our senses. And then it ends up in the material world. And I use that analogy of a movie projector. It is so much similar. And think about it. When you sit there, say you're at a movie theater and you're watching the latest incredible movie, you become so engrossed in what you're watching that World War III could happen and you'd ignore it. You just become totally, it's so real. What are you actually looking at? You're looking at fluctuating patterns of colored light on a white screen. You're not looking at actors. You're not looking at sets, or you're not looking at locations. You're looking at patterns of light on a white screen. It's your mind that gives that movie reality. You know, we get into the movie and the hero gets killed near the end and we're bawling away, and it's just patterns of white light. So this is what we experience as being external to us, this physical creation, our bodies and everything else. It's also a projection, and prana is one aspect of that projection. So you have Maya Shakti, then you have the levels between the 3 levels of mind and 5 levels of input senses, 5 levels of export senses, like the hands, feet, mouth, and so on. Then you have the 5 types of matter, which, which unfortunately get translated in English as ether, air, fire, water, and earth, which gives totally the wrong impression of what they are. They're actually the 5 ways that we perceive matter with our senses. So this is what it is. It's a projection, but it's real to us when we're in it, in the same way that a dream is real to us when we're in a dream. So prana is an aspect, I collapse those 36 or 24 down to 4 aspects of Shakti. There's Maya Shakti, and there's what I call Prakriti Shakti, which is a term from the Sankhya tradition meaning nature or the phenomenal universe, and Prana Shakti and Kundalini Shakti, which are what gives life to the physical creation. If you didn't have Prana Shakti and Kundalini Shakti, it'd just be a universe of dead and sentient matter. So those last 2, and so Prana Shakti and Kundalini Shakti are the intelligence that create this process. So that's the best I can do in terms of, my understanding of what prana is.
Would you say that, except for the ultimate reality, that everything coming from the ultimate reality is a type of dream?
Well, we're a dream of the transcendent consciousness. That's how the best way that I found to explain it. Because, I did a podcast last year and I was asked questions like, well, how does this, in this part of reality, relate to that? And I said, well, you're talking like they're separate. They're not. Well, your mind creates both the dream and the dreaming self. It creates them both. The transcendent consciousness creates the universe and the individual points of consciousness. But when you have the mystical experience, it becomes unity. It melts into one. And Gopi Krishna, he said, when you have this experience, it's like you are the knower and the known. You are the seer and the seen. You are the experiencer and the experienced both. It's like a dynamic. So nothing is truly separate from anything else from the higher order of reality. In the finite form of the reality, we have all this variation. They call it the world of name and form in Sanskrit, nama-rupa, name and form. And so this world of name and form is this projection, or as I explained, we're a dream of this transcendent consciousness that it populates with parts of itself. You have to keep in mind the perspective you're talking from. And when you mix up perspectives, it doesn't make any sense. So we are in finite bodies with finite minds, and the transcendent is infinite in every respect. We cannot apprehend that transcendent reality. In India, it was said that the transcendent reality is called Brahman. It's unknowable to the finite human mind in a state of normal consciousness. And even in enlightened consciousness, Gopi Krishna said that may not be the ultimate either. It's only what our individual brain is capable of interpreting, but it's not the reality. The reality is this unity. So you get into some very slippery areas in terms of how you express things and I always like to try and put it in those terms that when you're speaking from the perspective of the finite creation, this is the way it appears to be. But from the transcendent consciousness, it appears to be different. So, for instance, from our perspective, we have mathematics. And mathematics has been, it was discovered probably, it began in India, I think several thousand years ago, like back around the time of Christ, mathematics began. But we only have a tiny portion or whatever of the ultimate mathematics. The ultimate mathematics exists in the transcendent consciousness. As I was talking about in the article, it uses mathematics to create the physical reality through the mind and the senses and all that, in the same way that we use mathematics in the form of computer code. And I was a computer programmer for most of my working life. We do it through computer code to generate video games and animated movies. It's all mathematics. So the transcendent consciousness uses this mathematics. We have access to a little bit of that mathematics. But mathematics is a total conundrum to science, total conundrum. And the reason is it's the only thing we know of that is both objective and subjective. In terms of being objective, it describes every aspect of the physical creation, from how subatomic particles behave to how galaxies interact. But it's also subjective. It's a creation of our mind. Mathematics, it's a mental construct. Nothing else we know of is like that. And this is why this creation process that the Indian system came up with like 4,500 years ago, it explains mathematics, and science can't. It explains where the laws of nature come from. Science can't. It explains all these things. And so, but you have to keep in mind the perspective, or as Einstein would have said, the frame of reference from which you are talking. And when people talk about transcendent consciousness, they mix up the frames of reference. Like somebody said to me the other day, oh yeah, but your consciousness evolves. No, consciousness is like the light bulb in the projector. It doesn't evolve. It's the light bulb. It only puts out white light. That's all it does. It does it all the time. Our mind evolves, our brain evolves, and our mind, which works through the brain, changes in that way. So, you have to keep in mind what you're talking about in terms of the perspective. I hope that makes some sense. I think I'm confusing myself now.
No, you've been very enlightening, Michael, and questions keep occurring, more and more questions, but we should probably wrap it up. And I want to thank you for a fantastic interview. I learned a lot, and I'm sure other people will benefit also.
I hope so. And I sent you the link this morning for the article, which is on the Institute for Consciousness Research website. That's icrcanada.org. That article is kind of like the summation of 50 years of study of Kundalini with Gopi Krishna, with the Vedic tradition, and with learning Sanskrit. So that article is, to me, the culmination of my efforts in this area. If you want to go into even more depth and detail, then Consciousness, the New Paradigm is available as an ebook or a printed book on Amazon and other booksellers. So those will give you a much more detailed account of a lot of the things I've talked about today.
Yeah, I'll be sure to get any links from you and put it down at the bottom.
Yeah, take a go on the bottom.
That'll be
great. I hope you continue with this series of very interesting programs, and I'm honored to be a part of it.
Thank you.